Welcome to Raw Living Radio, where world-renowned leading-edge speakers, doctors, scientists, authors, and lifestyle experts share highly valuable weekly coaching tips, recipes, and empowering information about adding more raw, living, plant-based foods to your diet to improve your health, decrease your eco footprint, and raise your spirits. And now, your hosts, Mixers Hava and Clementine Libre.
Welcome back, everybody, to another week of Raw Living Radio. We are so excited you're joining us. I can see all of you callers on the line, and welcome, welcome, welcome. We invite you to play with us today and discover some new information and be inspired about whatever part of your life that you are transforming at this moment. And today, of course, I am joined once again by our beautiful, lovely, lovely mixtress, Hava. How are you today, Hava dear?
Hello, darling. I'm doing fabulous. I am so excited about this show today. Holy cow. I don't know where you have just been getting the most stellar radio guests. I love you for this. This is amazing. Today's guest is so incredible. We're going to get to the lovely Teal Swan in a moment here. I just came from Laura Sharia Fox's home. We are now diving deep into Raw Living Expo preparations. She and I were putting the finishing touches on the sponsorship deck, which, by the way, folks, I think this is a new one this year. There's Raw Living Radio sponsorship opportunities. So if you're interested in that, you can get a hold of Clementine or I. And so, yeah, that's exciting. And, boy, Laura Sharia Fox is she's on it. She's just an amazing, amazing producer, and so I'm so looking forward to the expo coming up this summer in Sedona. Again, it's going to be at the Hilton. It'll be its second time out of the 3 years it's been running at the Hilton out in the village of Oak Creek.
What does the fox say?
It's what?
I said, what does the fox say?
Come to Sedona. Come to Sedona.
That's what she said.
Yeah. So listen, I feel like we have a rock star on our show today. Teal Swan is just one of the most fascinating and inspirational creatures on the planet. She's an internationally recognized spiritual leader and a powerful new voice in the field of metaphysics. She's born with a wide range of extrasensory abilities like clairvoyance, clairsentience, and clairaudience. And having survived 13 years of physical, mental, and sexual abuse, she's emerged healed and integrated and uniquely equipped to help people find forgiveness, happiness, freedom, and self-love in their own lives through her synchronization workshops. I want to go to one that she presents around the world, her website, her YouTube channel, amazing videos, and her book, Sculptor in the Sky, a provocative guide to rediscovering the universe, spirituality, and oneself. That was released in 2011, and now, excitingly, she has a book coming out this spring, Shadows Before Dawn, released by Hay House. And, well, thank you so much for being here today, Teal.
It's awesome to join you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Oh, my goodness. Both Clementine and I have kind of been like kids on Christmas. Like, we just interviewed you. And what's so neat about you being here, Teal, is that Clementine and I are so impassioned by high vibrational nutrition. And we know it's one of your passions, has been for a while. Would love for you to dive in a little bit about, share whatever you care to about your life story and what brought you to where you are today as a spiritual catalyst and what that means.
Oh, my gosh. Very short story. Basically, after going through a hell of a lot of torture in my childhood years, I escaped from the situation I was in a state of complete destruction. It was like, the opposite of self-loving. I was cutting myself every week, and that was the only way I knew how to cope with the intense emotional swings. When I was self-medicating with sugar, I was that person who would, go to the grocery store and get an entire large bag, not the small bag, a large bag of Skittles, and then down that every day. And so, it spikes your blood sugar, and then it drops, so you have to self-medicate by spiking it again. And I was on this, roller coaster, basically. And it dawned on me when I started doing my research that what you eat actually affects your mood. And so if I'm struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder and it's really severe, I didn't want to add to it in any way by destroying my body. But then sometimes later I came down with a serious case of candida, and nothing that anybody was doing was working for me. And so yet again took education into my own hands, and I was like, oh my gosh, everything I've been taught about food is basically wrong, and the things I thought were good for me aren't good for me, and maybe I could use these extrasensory abilities to decide what kind of foods were good for me. And that just started me on this enormous journey. And as you know, anybody who goes down a healthy living path, it's just like this continual unfolding that comes in front of you, and then you just sort of put one foot in front of the other. And it became just this obsession, because I visited a nutritionist, and the first thing she did was to pull me off of all sugars, and I was unprepared for just how intense that detox would be. 'Cause it's like, sugar is a drug, like a genuine drug, but the majority of people, because it's so normal to eat sugar, would not look at it that way. But the withdrawals I had were very similar to the ones that I had on ketamine, which was actually a drug which I was injected with as a child in my abusive situation. So if it's anything like coming off of an opiate, that tells you just how serious it is. And what was really interesting after I went on that sort of the first food shift journey is that I started feeling amazing. My skin looked better, and it did improve my mood. And I had 10 times the stamina that I had before. And from there, it was just, I would say downhill, but let's go uphill. It was totally uphill from there. And amazing. I just don't get it how people can't see now the link between what we eat and the lives that we're living.
Yeah. And I think they probably do, but people have so much emotional stuff going on that they're not ready to really face that, even knowing intellectually that these habits aren't good, it's what they use to anesthetize and suppress, and yeah,
there's a lot of denial involved.
Yeah.
And so you would consider yourself a medical intuitive, and so I would say you're probably, you have a lot of people that that's probably one of the first things you share with them is what they're eating and how it's affecting them.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What's interesting, though, is to see how people's thought patterns make them a vibrational match to specific foods. So I used to be very strict about it with my clients. I would say, this is the stuff you are eating, this is the stuff you're not going to eat, until I realized that what was making them want to eat a donut instead of like a raw food, for example, is the fact that they're already not in a high frequency. And so the foods that they're vibing with are at a like frequency, which is very low in those particular states.
Right. Yeah, I was watching one of your videos, and you said that people get really gung-ho about changing their diet, but then get to a place of, I can't do this, it's too hard, and keep going back and back. And you say it's really just a matter of thinking different thoughts. It's about really what we're thinking and telling ourselves.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, the number one issue that I see with people when they're trying to do any kind of diet is that it becomes its own self-abusive lifestyle choice. So they start to, like, if you take a person who's in a negative emotional state and you have them start depriving themselves of foods that they are oriented towards, you're actually adding to their negative feeling states. And so quite often you'll just see a boomerang. Maybe they'll last through it for like 3 months or so, and then they're right back on eating the same way that they always have. That's because most of us in the healing industry who know it, like the perfect way for people to be eating, basically, we aren't willing to take these baby steps where people are actually stepping into empowerment relative to foods. So what we would start with somebody doing is to help them make decisions about what would be and feel the most healthy for them to do in terms of a small shift, and then they add that to their life. And if that means taking away something, we could do that too, but we don't extend it, we don't make it any more extreme than just that one tiny change. Maybe it's, for some people, I'm going to eat 1 apple today. So if that is a change in the direction of health, and that's what they can manage and feel empowered doing it, then they will feel accomplished after they've done that, and they'll keep doing that. And then when they feel empowered with that, we can add something else. So it's not like this complete life shift that's way too hard and it's over somebody's head, and that causes somebody to feel, instead of empowered, disempowered.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I know, I think I can speak for Clementine, what we love about your approach to diet, and this is why we love Gabriel Cousins, we love all of the Essene raw foodists like Ronnie Scuro and Sean Miller, is that you look at eating and what we put in our bodies as raising our vibration, choosing a frequency that's closer to source energy, treating eating as a spiritual practice.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's really important, I think, for people to involve our natural day-to-day living activities as their spiritual practice, because I feel like the issue with most people is that they draw a line between where spirituality is and where physical life is, but that line doesn't actually exist, because here in your physical body, you are an extension of source energy. That means everything you do, whether it's cleaning your house, whether it's putting food in your mouth, whether it's taking a shower, that is a spiritual act.
Right.
So we have to
and
be
it's about being mindful. Yeah, absolutely. Mindfulness, for sure.
And heartfulness.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
I was
going to say, even just doing the show, where you mentioned earlier that, all of these wonderful people are coming on and sharing this information with people and helping to, bridge all of these different areas of our life with our spirituality. And it's basically because of that as well. If you and I are coming from that space in our heart where that's what we want to share, then of course these amazing people are going to be attracted to come and be involved. So that's the same concept.
Yes.
And so I'd love to seg into Teal. You're talking about, if we can dive just a little into specifics about a high vibrational, high frequency diet. You talk about, I watched one of your videos that Clem shared with me about spiritual eating and the top foods that, really avoid, artificial sugars and white flour, and one of those up in the top is meat. And then I also watched one of your videos and you were talking about grounding. And, people say, well, meat grounds me. And they say, well, no, you're decreasing your frequency, actually, which maybe people mistake for feeling grounded. Maybe it's a little more comfortable. You talk more about meat eating and what it does to our vibration.
Well, first of all, people who are able to medically intuitive-wise see what's right for the body will tell you that the human body, even on just a physiological level, is not designed to eat meat. So just because we can, quote unquote, eat something does not mean that it is what's in the most alignment for us to be eating. If we've moved into, like we did as a species, areas of the globe where we literally were forced to eat things like that in order to survive, our body has created adaptations for it. But just because we have that adaptation doesn't mean that that particular food is the best for our bodies. And meat is one of these types of things. We actually don't have a stomach acid that is high enough to digest that kind of protein. So what's ironic from my standpoint is that when I watch somebody eat like broccoli or chia seeds, they're actually getting more protein out of that than they would an entire chicken breast because of the way that nutrient is assimilated. Which is, of course, the issue with a lot of people today is that they don't look at foods in terms of what is absorbable. They're just looking at the content of the food specifically. So they might tell you, well, there's more protein in the piece of chicken. I'm like, yeah, but is it being absorbed? That's the number one question we need to be asking.
Absolutely.
Not only that, we have to understand that we are also eating whatever that particular food item has spent time around. So this goes for vegetables and meats. I mean, if we're eating something that has been put through an abusive process, then that's obviously going to have a lower frequency, regardless of what that particular thing is. I mean, like you could have the best food in the world. Say you have a red bell pepper. That's one of the foods that humans tend to do the best with. If you had two bell peppers side by side and one of them was grown in an organic setting where people really loved the farming process and that kind of thing, it would be a better thing for you to eat than the other one, even though on a physical level you'd say it's the exact same content. It actually isn't. So when we're thinking about meats, we have to understand that this organism has a central nervous system. The minute that something has a central nervous system, that means that it has a fight or flight mechanism and stress hormones. So what you're noticing is when these animals are going into the fight or flight mode, and just so you know, most of them are raised in that atmosphere because it's a super non-loving environment, those stress chemicals get dumped into the body. And so then you're eating that. You're also eating grief. You're eating everything that that animal has gone through because it is being pumped through its tissues. Interesting.
And so is there any difference in meat? You know, if somebody says, well, I'm only eating grass-fed and they have mazes to play in and they can wander for hours and they're only getting this and that and they're just the most amazingly happy cows, is there any difference between a well-maintained and sustained animal and one that's not in the way that they die? I mean,
yeah,
I don't know that there's. Go ahead.
There is a big difference. You'll notice based on how they raise the animals, there is a big vibrational difference between one meat and another meat. But our argument is, I feel like if you're going to live a spiritual life and if you're going to care what goes in your body, then we should be caring about decreasing suffering. No matter whether we can decrease that suffering by not buying foods that are mono-farmed or by not eating meat entirely, we should look to decrease suffering to the highest degree that we can. And the reality that most of us are faced with is that we have created a society where we literally can eat a vegetarian diet. Like I'm not going to be the first person that's going to go after somebody who's, I'm not going to go after people for personal decisions in general, but I'm not going to go after somebody who's still living in a climate where they have to eat meat because there literally isn't anything else available.
Right.
But what I have an issue with is that when we have habits, whether it's meeting or whatever, we love to use excuses when the reality is we quite literally could afford in every way to live a lifestyle where we didn't have that kind of thing as part of our diet, but we just don't want to for one reason or another.
Well, and it goes back to, well-being on a whole and a holistic level. There's always so much more involved and that's where you're helping people so much because you're not focusing on one thing. You're showing them how it's all so intertwined and how, it's not even healthy just to focus on one thing. But, you do have to start somewhere, and if you can at least have some awareness of how all of these things are attributing to your well-being overall, then it's beneficial to take the time to begin to really explore all those paths.
Yes.
So how do you invite people to perhaps move beyond this disconnect that they have between where their food comes from and in consuming these foods? Because I think on a global scale we're very disconnected, and I see that shifting, thankfully. But we're very disconnected from how our food is raised and. How can we make that vibrational shift? It seems like that's kind of a big part of, people continuing in their habits.
Oh, it's very easy. I reconnect them with themselves. Because I operate under this premise. The premise is that at our most basic level, it is natural for us to feel connection. So if we have developed a disconnection somewhere, that's an indication that we are disconnected from ourselves somewhere. So I treat the person almost like a microcosm. If you can get that person to open back up to their emotions, to start living a life of authenticity where they're admitting to really painful truths about themselves and the way that they feel, then they start to develop that sensitivity again. They, not so much of them is delegated to the subconscious because they're re-accepting the things that were buried in the subconscious. And as a result, they start to develop sensitivities. This is what's the most beneficial and also the most irksome part of spiritual progress is that you'll start to be incredibly sensitive to everything that you're around, including food. I sort of laugh because it's like, have fun on your spiritual journey because guess what? In, T-5 seconds, you're not going to be able to eat that food anymore.
Or smell this or do that. I found myself one day in the grocery store. I lost my appetite because of how many people I realized touched my apples when they were on the conveyor belt. And I was like, oh no, I'm hypersensitive today. I need to go and sit and be still somewhere.
Yeah, see, this is where the bravery comes in, I think, nowadays, because when you're in this type of a reality that we have co-created for ourselves, which is an incredibly harsh society, which is not something which we are designed to live in, it's almost like you quote unquote have to tune yourself out to live here. But my argument is it really does need to be a few really brave individuals that are willing to stay completely sensitive and then wake other people up so that the totality of us are sensitive. Because if all of the human race becomes that sensitive, we will be living in a different society. And so we'll be eating different foods. We'll be designing different kinds of schools. We'll be living in different kinds of communities. And that's the kind of world I think most of us want to see. But that's only going to happen if we let ourselves become that sensitive again.
Yeah, and that sensitive, right now there's just this big space, and like you said, when we all start to become sensitized again, it starts to close up that space. It allows us to flow more with one another, to really be in this dance together, because when we've got that big space, everything gets just really kind of discombobulated.
Super.
Yeah, I watched your interview with Dan of Rabrov, and you guys were talking about dealing with childhood trauma. It doesn't have to be childhood, it could be infancy. You guys were talking about circumcision, which is a whole other subject. I just loved your guys' conversation, because I too listened to that interview with Daniel Vitalis. But what you were talking about is that you are no longer your true self when the schism occurs, where something happens to you and you're not allowed, for those emotions and the feelings to move through naturally and to, take us through grief, trauma, really intense experiences. If we're not allowed to really move through them authentically and really feel what's going on, that we split from our true selves, and that, what we're talking about here about being sensitive again is that we then find all these mechanisms we can to keep all of that stuff, swept under the carpet. And I loved how you're talking about working with that inner child again, that you called that soul retrieval. I thought that was such a neat connection. Can you talk a little bit about what happens when we go back and reintegrate?
Yeah, okay, so at the moment of trauma, and when I use the word trauma, I mean we got to have a real open mind to what that means. It means that you're putting the whole bodily system in a state of stress. But that could be something as extreme as abuse. It could also be something as quote-unquote minor as feeling jealous because somebody else at a birthday party got a birthday present.
Mm-hmm.
So when we experience any kind of trauma, then we are having a distressed emotional response. Now, we have to be allowed to feel those feelings and find resolution with those feelings in order to move past that and then integrate that experience into our growth process and pattern. But if, when we're children, we aren't allowed to do that, which is quite common because in our day and age, which is the age of emotional ignorance, basically we're discouraged from feeling those emotions. So let's go here with the example. A child at a birthday party feels jealous because another kid gets a present. And if they express that jealousy, they'll most likely be shamed. Why would you think that? You get presents all on your birthday. This is not your birthday. You need to sit down and be okay with your friend getting presents. That right there is an invalidation of the emotional state. It teaches the child that that state is unacceptable. And so we do this thing, which is splitting. And the major split within our being is conscious and subconscious. So when we live in this society, as humans, we are relationally dependent. That means that we absolutely must be in a state of acceptable in order to be assimilated into the social group and thus accepted and thus loved and thus survive. Yeah? So we have to dissociate ourselves as far as possible from aspects of ourselves that are unacceptable. So if jealousy is unacceptable, and in that moment I'm feeling jealousy gets suppressed, denied, disowned, dissociated from, and that goes into the subconscious. The mass of what's in the subconscious mind is what we deemed long ago was unacceptable about us. Now this can include feeling states. It can also include entire memories. So the way to see this on a conscious level is to think about consciousness as a stream of energy, kind of like a river. At the moment of trauma, if we need to dissociate from our experience because we can't move through it, it's like a stream branching off from the original river. And that takes with it that feeling state, that emotion, that experience, sometimes the full memory, sometimes the talent that was unacceptable. A vast many things can be in that branch-off stream, but we need to, in our adult life, go back and get that branch-off stream to come rejoin the main current of the river again. And we can do that with these trauma processes. I've just actually finished my third book, which is all about that particular process. But we are literally going back in time when we do that. So we have to consider the idea that the only thing we would actually need a time machine for is to take our physical body back in time. But that our emotional and mental aspect of our life can go back and forward in time at will, and does so the minute you visualize the past.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And the same goes for trauma that you were just completely incapable of processing, like, you know, as an infant or something. Yeah.
Oh, yes. It's pretty crazy what the being dissociates from, but that you remember completely. But what's frustrating is that wholeness is our most natural state. It's why you don't need to coax your body into healing when you cut your finger. It just does it. So we have to consider, basically, that on an emotional level, our body is after that integration, wholeness, and healing as well. It's going to chase us down whether we want it to or not. And what that looks like is pain. So on a physical level, if you've got pain, that's an indication that there's an aspect of your body that's out of alignment. Those pain receptors is what sets your body off to know, oh, we need to heal this over here. But emotional pain works the same way. It's like a wake-up call or a red flag saying we need to heal this over here so that it can actually be lent your conscious attention. But when people start to do that, they recover whole aspects of themselves that they've suppressed. So here's an example of some of the good stuff, because what I'm talking about here is like intense shadow work. It's let's figure out what's in your subconscious, which is a lot of bad stuff, but it's also a lot of good stuff. So let's say that when you were young, you were a really great singer, but it's not accessible to be a good singer in your family because you have to go to college, right? You would say, oh crap, that's unacceptable, and then you would delegate that to the subconscious mind. Maybe when you reintegrate that memory or that aspect of your subconscious, suddenly you want to go take voice lessons again. Suddenly you realize this is my passion. Then you become a singer at age 40. It's like awesome, amazing, the kind of stuff that can be delegated to the subconscious mind that is really us living in a state of inauthenticity because we haven't owned the totality of who we are yet. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you talk, Teal, about how when everything's integrated and you've gone back, made that soul retrieval, you've made peace with that experience or that schism, that suddenly you made the example of maybe you smoked before, that once you're really in that self-love and that self-acceptance, that habit most likely disappears quite instantly.
Oh, yeah, which is what I just love it because, if you talk to the average Western medical doctor who's been educated in medical school and hasn't done much research beyond that, they'll argue with the fact that if you've got a chemical dependency, then the physiology of your body is against healing. Now, I laugh, of course, because I'm like, okay, well, let's just consider this. This is an actual scenario I'm going to give you from something that happened with me and a client. So I had a client who came to me who was a chain smoker. We're talking 6 packs a day, right, for the last 10 years. So we figure out what is it that you're trying to get away from by smoking. So when he wanted the cigarette, we went straight into the vibration of what he was trying to get away from by using that particular substance. What he found out is it was almost like a panic and a grief. So instead of running away from it, we went right into that emotional reaction and went through that back to a memory where he was standing there watching his father leave him. So he's watching the truck drive away and he's got that same sensation of powerlessness. So this would be considered one of those times where his soul, which is just his stream of consciousness, split. It fractured. And part of him did not move forward in time. It remained stuck there. And so it is also a point of attraction. So it's going to keep coming up again, keep coming up again. So he keeps attracting experiences in his life that make him feel that way. So by processing that particular memory and convincing his little childhood aspect that it was okay, we were able to coax him through a process of mental integration and progress. That's the whole key. We actually found some resolution for that trauma that he went through. And when that happened the very next week, it was his smoke break. He didn't get up and go take a cigarette. And this is the fun part about healing, is it's not usually this clash, bang, oh my gosh, amazing thing. Usually it's very subtle. You're just sitting there like he was, and he's like, wait, it's a smoke break. Usually I'm just waiting and looking at the clock, and I don't even feel the need to smoke. So on a physiological level, that's very hard to explain. But if you factor in the consciousness, it's very easy to explain. We affect the causation, and by affecting the causation, that affects all the effects that are a result of the causation. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, this is like my total passion subject.
Well, and I like how you're making it clear that, the organism wants to be in this state of wellness, of whole being. And so even emotionally, so when we have all of these traumas and these things that have been buried and that we have been unable to cope with or whatever, we think we've swept them under the rug, but what's happening instead is vibrationally and energetically, we keep on bringing these opportunities into our life to cope with it. And we see it as, why is my life going so wrong? Why does this always happen to me? Why do I always wind up with that same type of person or that same type of boss or that same type of job or always, I make way more money now and I'm still broke or whatever the case may be. And it's because we keep on bringing that opportunity back up because it wants to heal. And, but we have no idea that that's what's happening.
Yeah, it took me almost 40 years to figure that one out. And a lot of my addiction shifted when I finally dealt with my quote-unquote childhood trauma that I thought was no big deal. And, it's no big deal, So, yeah, it's powerful stuff. Powerful stuff.
Well, and I think that that's how raw foods and change of diet and all that really come into play, because what begins to happen for people is maybe they watch a movie and it's, they show these horrific images of animals and they go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this is what was happening and I'm not going to support that anymore. So they have some idea of, all of a sudden come alive in their mind. Okay, I'm not doing this anymore. So they change their diet, they change their lifestyle, they start acting from a different level of consciousness, but everything's shifting, everything's changing, and they start to detox on every aspect, on every level. And then it's like, you've got to know how to deal with this stuff at some point,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's another thing I'd like to bring up which relates to the raw diet, because basically we're talking about the body having a natural healing mechanism, right? So whenever we set out to heal, we have all forces in the universe on our side, even though it sometimes feels to people who are in a state of unhealth like the body's against you. But the thing about eating really great foods, especially raw foods that are super high in phytonutrients and vitamins and minerals, is that it literally turns on your body's metabolism at the cellular level. So it's regulating hormones, and the kind of antioxidants that you can get through your food is basically giving your body the boost that it needs completely for its own mechanisms, healing mechanisms, to be completely fully supported and heal itself. So it's not like you need those prescription medications, really, that everybody's been giving you for your body to come back into a state of alignment. Sometimes you just need to feed it what supports it to do what it already does naturally.
Mhm. Yeah, that's where what you're doing and what a lot of people there's becoming more and more integrative sort of options out there, and it's really great because the more that people actually have these experiences and that they can share them, the more that people will realize that option's available for them.
Mhm. Don't you wish? See, I visualize this world in the future where good foods are the ones that cost nothing and bad foods are the ones that cost everything. That'd be nice.
Yeah. So true.
And sort of in a way, I mean, that's already the way it is. It's in an energetic sort of way. It's costing us a heck of a lot to eat these foods that aren't serving us.
This is my favorite one. That's my favorite argument. When people are like, well, I can't really afford it. I'm like, so you're telling me you can afford health care? Because I know I can't in this country. So if this is your policy to stay out of the hospital, then I'm pretty sure it's worth it.
Yeah, it's a pretty ridiculous argument, isn't it? Yeah, it always comes back when we talk about, free food. It's like, boy, it's just time to mobilize our urban gardens and our personal gardens and just there's a movie out now called Urban Fruit, and it's quite mind-blowing how much stuff is growing on the streets of LA and how much amazing land is available for growing, and just how non-connected we are to the resources all over the place that we could be using to really get back in touch with our natural rhythms and cycles and diet. It's What a remarkable.
Oh yeah, that brings me back to argument number 500 about why not to eat meat. Okay, ready? So the majority of what we're farming is actually going to feed cattle. Most people don't know that. So if you look at all the agriculture that's grown, some ridiculous percentage actually goes to feed our cattle and our sheep and everything else that we're eating. So if we were to actually delegate that to world hunger instead of feeding the meats that we're eating, we could quite literally feed everybody on this planet today.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's true. It's amazing.
Yep. There's a lot of really, interesting studies that have been done that people can, look into and read too if they want more information. There's the China study, which of course, covers a lot of that. There's Fast Food Nation. That book is amazing. That set me on my vegetarian journey, where I actually started to tell people I was vegetarian because I didn't even tell anybody for a couple of years. I didn't want to deal with the opinions of others, so I just didn't say anything about it for like 2 years. But when I read that book, I felt, hey, I am, it was a humanitarian decision for me, so I started to talk to people about it. But there's so many resources that can, really inform you and help you to align with your decisions.
Yeah.
So it's certainly not a dogma, and it's not a, I really don't align with the activism side of it either. I feel like it's a personal decision, and if you really just kind of bring yourself and bring your awareness to your breath, moment by moment by moment, Teal, that's something that you've taught, actually. I do it in my own little weird way, but it's reminding me right now as I'm saying it, what would a person who loves themselves choose?
Mm-hmm.
That is like one of your most powerful teachings. It's so simple, and anybody can, remind themselves to do that daily. Can you talk a little bit about that, about where that comes from and how that helps to align a person?
Well, yeah. So if you ask that question, you will intuitively know what the answer is. And so what most people don't understand is that the answer to what would someone who loves themselves do is actually coming from your higher self, which also on just a food-based level, it knows all of the balances of all of the nutrients inside your body. So let's say that it knows what you're deficient in as well. If you ask yourself at a grocery store, what would someone who loves themselves do, an apple or an orange? And your answer that you get intuitively is apple. You may not have any conscious awareness of why that answer is what it is. But we have to consider that there is an aspect of our consciousness that knows 100% that the apple is more within alignment with our body and what our body needs at this particular moment. So it's an act of proactively going in the direction of what feels good in your life, but also allowing yourself to be directed in the direction which is the best for you in your life. Mm-hmm. I think that what most of us don't realize is that we wonder why we're unhappy, but we're living our entire life according to things that really don't have anything to do with happiness. Like what would somebody who loves themselves do? Go right or left? Well, left because it's the fastest way to get there. Well, that wasn't the point. The point of life is to like the journey, right? So if the answer's right, then that probably means there's something that's down that particular road for you. So what I'm helping people do is to tune themselves into their intuition about what is really good for them and what they really want. So it's a way of getting people to be honest with themselves without really forcing them to look at their shadow aspects in order to do that. But what's super funny is when you ask yourself continually throughout the day like a mantra, what would someone who loves themselves do? You keep making self-loving decisions. And then those self-loving decisions, even though this particular process sounds like a super, super trite self-help technique, it's like the mothership, because what you find is that everything that's in the way of your self-love, everything that's in the way of your happiness will come up as a roadblock. So today it might be, what would someone who loves themselves do? An apple or an orange. Tomorrow it might be, what would someone who loves themselves do? Quit my job or keep it. So very serious decisions are being made according to what I would do if I really cared about myself and loved myself. Mm-hmm. And you can't imagine what happens to your life when you start asking that question over and over again. It's just like you can't keep it the same way. It shifts, massive shifts.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a logic override because, if you're going to sit there and do logic on it, it's like, well, apples and oranges are both good for me, right? So the point is to get out of that logic and let it go, have trust, be able to actually feel that subtle energy and that guidance that's coming up. And by asking, you shall receive.
Yeah, I think what most people don't understand about their logical mind is that even though the logical mind is beneficial, it's a good tool. It's a tool you only want to use in specific situations. And that tool is highly influenced by the opinions that you've been raised with. So logic for somebody in Africa is going to be much different than logic for someone in the USA. So who's right? You know?
Exactly. Yep. And we see that all the time where we go, oh, well, I would have never thought of something that way. Well, that's exactly why. Because they have this completely different set of conditioning and, sort of indoctrination than you do.
Yes. Life becomes much more simple when you live according to what would someone who loves themselves do.
Yes,
but then,
I love that.
It's all about bravery, right? That's the hardest part of the process, even for someone like me, is like, okay, I know what someone who loves themselves would do, but that means I have to be super brave at this moment because I might be thinking, that's going to come with some serious consequences. But what we have to realize is that the most serious consequence to our life and our health and our bodies is to live according to anything other than that question, basically.
Mhm. Yeah. Yep. And it requires trust, and that can be a scary thing because a lot of us are used to being told, oh yeah, you're doing it right, keep on going. We get some reassurance or whatever. But in this case, it's a matter of just having the trust to follow the guidance and just know that everything's going to be okay, however it turns out. And yeah. That's how I wound up moving the last time I moved. I did that sort of process and just listened, and I had no idea why I was moving to where I was moving, or it didn't make any sense logically whatsoever, but I listened, and it was a strong sort of, message. So I said, okay, this is something I've been asking to learn to do, is to trust in my own intuition and my own inner guidance, and here's the test. I'm being told really strongly to do something that makes no sense to me at all. Am I going to listen or not? And I did. So.
Yeah, it's really smart. I would always encourage people also who have an issue with the trusting thing to let themselves get to the point where it literally is only a matter of if I can't trust myself, right, let's just pretend I'm there. Because a lot of people are there where they're like, well, it's one thing to say, oh, just trust yourself. It's another thing to do it because honestly the truth is I don't. But you can get to this crossroads, which most of us get to, where it's like, you know what, anything is better than this. Even if it literally is total destruction, it's better than the place that I have my life in right now.
Yeah.
And that is a really beautiful, it's awful, like when you're in the middle, it feels like hell, but it's this awesome opportunity. It's that fork in the road, basically, which causes most of us to just wing it and say, even if I do meet with bad ends, it's better. So let's just try it. Let's risk it,
Hava and I are humming. So, Teal, how did you get interested in interviewing people like Dan from the Raw Bras and Omar from Omar's Rawtopia? Those were such amazing interviews and just really inspiring. I was so happy to see you sharing that with everybody. What really sparked you to follow through with that and reach out to these people and talk with them and start to, incorporate more lifestyle along with all of the, greater teachings that you have been doing for some time now?
Well, with the Raw Bras, they contacted me, and so I had never heard of them before the time that I did that particular interview, but I decided to accept that interview because I usually steer about as far away from the Christian demographic as I possibly can because a lot of my teachings tend to be very challenging for the Christian demographic. But it's not a group that I feel particularly interested in alienating, and I felt like it would be a really good bridge, basically, to reach out to that demographic and say, you don't really have to be New Age, and you don't have to be metaphysically oriented, you don't have to be Buddhist or whatever else in order to have these kinds of conversations. In fact, let's look at how even somebody with Christian faith is basically talking about the same principles that I'm talking about, just in different language. So that was my motivation for that interview.
I love it.
I decided to interview Omar because I think he's a fascinating human being, but I'm really, really interested in making people aware that raw food is a possibility for them. And it's something that really interests me, what gets people interested in this type of thing. I thought that maybe, I wanted him to come up with some ways that just the average layman could introduce raw foods into their diet in an easy way so they weren't struggling. And I'm just pretty fascinated with other people's opinion. I'm like a real curious person. I've got this real nutty professor side, so I like to make it an availability thing, I guess you could call it. In my childhood, what was the most painful is I really had no access. I mean, most of us were around before the internet and before even computers, so you were kind of limited to the library, and that's if you could get to one for any kind of information. And so a hell of a lot of my struggle on my own, of course, was the fact that I never had these outlets, so I didn't know how to answer the questions that I was questioning. And in my life, there's this really beautiful capability I have now, which is to do for people what I really wanted to have done for me when I was younger. I wanted people to, be able to look to for some of the answers to this kind of stuff. I would have loved to have had access to people who knew more about diet than my parents did. So I'm real motivated to get people information about anything and everything that might potentially be interesting.
Yeah,
well, nice creating.
Summed up Clementine and I.
Nice creating to all of us. We all really desired that, and now instead that's what we give.
Oh, and it's worth it though. I mean, I get all these emails, even from like teenagers. Those are my favorites. The ones that are in high school right now. And I'm remembering myself at 15 and just being like, if I had something like my videos to watch when I was 15, I would have been so much better off. So it's like it's full circle. It's like I'm getting closure by getting those emails and by doing what I'm doing.
Absolutely.
And so Teal, what happened for you with your these extrasensory abilities during your time that you were experiencing all of this abuse? Did they kind of go underground for that time? Were you able to access and use them to survive that time? What happened for you during that period?
Well, the thing is, when you have an extrasensory ability and your vibration dips, is you just become a match to a whole other range of vibrational entities.
Mm-hmm.
So what it was is that the extrasensory experiences that I was having were quite darker, and I mean significantly darker than the ones that I have access to today. So I remember very specifically I would dip low enough into vibrational states where even my guides that I can see all the time, just like a normal person, when they would speak, I literally was not a vibrational match to being able to hear the words that they were speaking. And I was a match to like darker entities, what we would consider thought forms that are just imprints left around from murders and things like that. That would be the majority of what I would attract. And so instead of the spirituality aspect of it being like an uplifting thing, it was almost like a living hell. But those were the dimensional realities that I was a match to in those states. So my extrasensory ability was the greatest curse I could have possibly had at that particular time.
Right. So what a beautiful observation in that's kind of a metaphor for how we can be living in a vibrational match to what we desire, is that when our frequency is high enough to attract what it is we really desire into our lives rather than the opposite or keeping it away, and which of course means really raising our vibration for what we're putting in our body and the thoughts we're thinking. That's a great metaphor, your experience.
I was taught that emotions, just like most people, emotions don't matter, and it's like you don't grow up understanding them. They're kind of this scary force that really can't be understood. I was no different. That's how I saw emotion. So when I was going through all these experiences, it never occurred to me that it might be important that I feel good. It was only until I got stuck actually in a hole over and over again. It was this mental training torture technique that my abuser had, but I got stuck in a hole by myself, and it's like, it used to be the worst thing in the entire universe to me, but now looking back on it, I sort of see it as the universe's great training field for me, because being stuck in there for hours made it so that at one point, this is what really turned everything around for me, at one point I realized that my emotions, the way I was feeling, changed based on what I was focused on. And that was, even though to us today it seems sort of like a duh, that was an absolute revelation. That really the only thing that was making me upset is, am I focused on what this guy's going to do to me in 5 minutes, or am I focused on the little ant that's in here in this hole with me? And so when I started to see that really shifted the way I felt, I started to get deliberate with my focus. And it was only then that I was a match to being able to hear a lot of the spiritual guides, basically, that were with me. When I was able to hear them say things like, keep focusing on this, keep focusing on that, then I became a match to all this information. when I was still in the abusive situation about the fact that it's actually mind that creates reality. And also I was educated about how I lined up with that particular experience. Now that's, of course, seriously groundbreaking for somebody who says, look, I was abused sexually and physically as a child, how I could have, as a child, attracted that into my reality. But it was like that blue pill and the red pill moment of The Matrix. I don't know if you've seen that movie where it's like, you can take this and it's going to be really painful going down, but it's also going to be a liberation. That was the moment for me, is, you know what, by virtue of what I've been thinking, I also created this in my life. But by the same token, I can use that same focus and manifest my way out of this scenario. And I did that. So I'm like walking proof of the fact that your mind creates reality as a result of figuring out that it mattered how I felt, and that focus really was what created the way I felt.
Wow. It's so amazing to, you know, have these realizations in our lives, you know, how all of these moments have really, you know, led to what we're doing in this moment now, and how relevant it all is and how significant it all is. And the ironies that are there, you know, like there's some, you know, really well-known teachers in this world who, you know, are teaching to thousands and thousands and thousands of people because of what they learned through sensory deprivation. And then here your abuser was putting you through sensory deprivation, which in turn wound up empowering you.
Yeah, I know it's pretty like the opposite of what they wanted, right? But that's what makes it so beautiful but also confusing, is that later on when you are able to see the big picture, which really that's not something you can force. It's almost like you keep going through the motions of life in the direction of progression, and suddenly you turn around and the full picture of your life is now completely clear. But the line between the people that hurt us and the people that helped us the most really doesn't exist anymore. Suddenly it's like, wow, the very person who helps me the most on this path to who I am is in fact the very person who created all the issues.
Those are the kinds of moments that kind of stop us in our tracks. It feels like the whole world just hits us at once, or everything we could realize hits us all at once, and we go, whoa.
Yeah, totally.
Pretty incredible.
So, Teal, I'm curious, being as integrated and healed and present and powerful as you are, I'm curious about your love relationships. Is it really hard for you to find, you know, as high a vibration person as you? I'd love for you to talk a little bit about love.
Well, if I'm going to be quite authentic and honest, my area of greatest struggle is interpersonal relationships. Big surprise coming from an abusive upbringing. So relationships are not something which I would claim to have mastered completely. I would say that I have learned a hell of a lot, enough that I could definitely teach about it. But it's like a progression thing in my own life on a personal level, is I'm not at a space of completion relative to my interpersonal relationships, especially romantic relationships. I've got bad habits, and I tend to gravitate towards people who do mirror my primary caregiver still. So it's been difficult for me, yes.
Yeah, well, what I think is so beautiful about you, and you've talked about this before, is that you were brave enough in this progression of your work in the public eye, and who was attracted to your work is that you were really honest with yourself that I have to be completely authentic with who is, quote unquote, following me. And you've been so beautiful in the sharing of your authentic humanness. And just like this with love relationships, you know, you're not trying to put on some, you know, white-robed guru act so that people will, you know, come and follow you. It's beautiful, your human, you know, because you have such a almost otherworldly quality to you with these extrasensory perceptive skills that we all have, but that you're connected to. It's just beautiful that you've balanced your humanness and these beautiful gifts you have.
Don't we all wish that your abilities could just exempt you from living life normally?
I've graduated.
I even fall into that trap. Some days I'm like, could this just be practical in some way, please? I would love it to just, you know, I would love to just be whisked away onto a golden carpet, but the reality is that that's not the kind of teacher we need nowadays. I feel like we're done with the routine. We're in a space where we're ready to become our own teachers. Right. And what I mean by that is we're ready to really take our information from wherever it comes from and to not see that ourselves as disconnected from anybody. So we want to get to the point where we can, somebody like me, could walk into, say, a Mormon tabernacle and allow the universe to speak through the person to me, or talk to somebody who's homeless on the street and allow the universe to talk through that person to me. So we're really picking up our information from absolutely everywhere. And the issue with the enlightened guru who has no, problems, even though it is considered career suicide to do what I'm doing, and we're going to see the outcome of that eventually. I think it's super, super crucial for us to not be separated from our divinity. And what we have decided collectively as a culture is that when we're sitting at the feet of somebody who's a guru, who's sitting above us, it actually separates us from our own connection to God, our own connection to source energy, and so that's not going to be benefiting us at all. So the way that I look at it is, if you're really going to be a good teacher nowadays, you better do essentially what Jesus decided to do, which was to get in with the lepers, because only then can somebody like a person who's in a position of leprosy see that there's no separation between themselves and God, than there is a separation between a guru and their God. It's all the same connection. One person is just open to that connection, the other person still has the door closed. That's the only difference.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, fabulous.
That's just
Oh,
really
man, we only have 4 more
my
minutes.
soul.
Oh.
I can talk somebody's ear off.
I do want to say, though, and in commenting on how things have changed from the teachers being the gurus to what they are now, and it just seems to be that the people who, I can only talk from my personal experience, so the people who are attracting me to learn more and inviting me to learn more, the invitations that I receive are from the people who are being vulnerable, are from the people who are, something scary comes up in their life and they run towards it instead of away from it. They are the ones who are taking that step towards really embracing every aspect of themselves, and that's what you're doing. And some of the other people out there who are teaching, it's really begun to shift a lot. And I think that part of the reason that that's happening is because ultimately, like you were saying, Teal, about the relationships, mastering the relationship, well, the one we have to master is the one with ourselves. And if we keep on doing that, that's where we will wind up. And as we do it, and as each person sort of ignites that within themselves, that lends to everybody else coming along for the ride. So we're on our way.
Yep. I can feel it. It feels like a really exciting time in life now, when I'm not focused on things that are dragging me down, of course. But I can definitely feel the promise.
Mhm. Mhm. You just stay out of, big cities and no.
I know, right? Go get the tinfoil and wrap it around your head a few times.
Well, I want to remind everyone. Oh, go ahead, Hava.
Yes, no, we might be going to the same place. You go ahead. I was going to mention I would love for Teal to spend a minute or so on her synchronization workshops and what she's putting out there. But go ahead.
All right, so I think every 6 weeks I'm in a different city with these synchronization workshops. And the way it works is, if you're sitting in the same room with people, you're a vibrational match to them. That means that whoever steps up on stage with me and asks their question and is helped through their question, that particular information applies to everyone in the audience, which is why some people can go to certain ones and other people can't. So it's this collective group healing experience. So even though it's a question and answer format, it's a way of me teaching in a more interactive way than just talking at people for 6 hours straight. And you'll notice that the vibration of the room just increases. And so not only are you getting that information, you're also basically getting a vibrational bath. So when you walk out the door, you've been immersed in that high frequency energy for 6 hours. So I just love these things, and I love meeting people in all these new places. So on my website, I have it listed, all the new places that we're going for the given year. So maybe if you look, you'll find one in your area.
Yeah, I still want to go.
February in Austin, and April in San Francisco, and then also a new book that Hava mentioned in the beginning that's coming out in May on Hay House, Shadows Before Dawn. And can you talk just for a brief moment about Open Shadow as well?
Oh yeah, Open Shadow is the new documentary that this Italian filmmaker decided to do on my life, and it's a super inspirational story. So I think that's going to come out the same time as my new book is. They're slated for May as well, and that, of course, will be posted all over Facebook and on my website as well.
And I'm going to make sure to put posts in our event page for today. I will put posts to the website and to the YouTube channel and any other resources that'll be helpful for everybody to find Teal ASAP. And before we go and before we sign off and say our final farewell with Teal for today, I just want to remind everybody quickly about the Conscious Life Expo that's coming up in February, the 6th through 8th at the LA Hilton. Again, it's called the Conscious Life Expo. You can find it at consciouslifeexpo.com, and you will see a lot of our vendors and healers and teachers in common from the Raw Living Expo there, like Astarius Miraculi and many others. So check it out and come and say hi to me. I will be there wandering around, and I want to talk with you. So, Hava, anything else today we want to talk about before we sign off?
No, just that, Teal, I think you should come to Sedona. You would be so beautifully received here. You're right up our alley.
I would love to come. Sedona's my favorites.
Yeah, and wow, Clementine, I think we should have Teal at Raw Living Expo, don't you?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, all right. More to come.
More to come.
Well, thank you so much, Teal. You are so wonderfully down to earth, and but I feel so high as well. You've just been such an amazing guest. I'm so grateful you've been with us.
Thanks for having me so much. I'd love to come on anytime.
Yeah, let's do it again. In fact, why don't we try to do this another time, when it's a good time for everybody, and we'll take callers because there's a lot of people who are on the line today, and we want to acknowledge you all out there. Thank you so much for supporting and for listening, and I know you all have some great questions, so maybe we could do that in the future.
Sounds good.
That'd be fun.
All right. Okay, well, thanks everybody for being here again for Raw Living Radio. Make sure you tune in again next week. And in the meantime, as Laura Sharia Fox says, enjoy your magnificence, and we will be seeing you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Raw Living Radio. Tune in live on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and listen to all of our previous shows archived at rawlivingradio.com. Visit us on Facebook at Raw Living Radio, and stay tuned for more information about the upcoming Raw Living Expo happening this summer, 2015. In the meantime, stay inspired, love your life, and keep it raw.